Hi and welcome to the video. And what I'm going to be doing is showing you the kind of memory cards that I sell on eBay and other websites under the name of sajidokidpsp. Now, as you can see, I've got a 16 and a 32 gig memory card lined up, and both of them have custom firmware and a whole host of movies, PSP games, PS1 games and emulators stored on them. Now, as you can see, the PSP that I've got here is not on custom firmware. It's running on the official Sony version 6.39. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you how quick and how simple it is to install the custom firmware on your PSP if you've already got one and if you buy one of my memory cards. So I'm going to pick up the 32 gig memory card and put it inside the PSP. Okay, exit out of that. So the first thing we'll do, we'll go over to Game and Memory Stick. And what I'll first of all try and do is I'll try and run any one of the games. Okay, so here's Crash Bandicoot 3 for the PlayStation 1, which is stored on the memory card, and it'll tell me the copyright protection is invalid, or if I go down to one of the emulators, it'll tell me that the game cannot be started because the data is corrupt, and that's because we haven't got the custom firmware installed on there. Now, like I said, the custom firmware is very, very quick and easy to install, and it's so quick and easy, I'm going to do it right now. So here is the icon to install the custom firmware. Press X on it. And what it'll do, it'll just take you to a simple menu, and it'll just ask you to confirm whether you want to put the custom firmware on your PSP. You press X to confirm that you do, and you press X again to finish, and then that's it, and then everything else will work. So here's the menu. Okay, so you press X, it flashes your PSP, it's complete, you press X, and there you go. That's how quick and easy it is to put the custom firmware on your PSP. It doesn't do any damage to your PSP, it doesn't harm it in any way. All it does is allow you to do a hell of a lot more with your PSP than if you didn't have the custom firmware. Now, if you do install the custom firmware, all your normal games and movies will work absolutely as normal, so you don't have to worry about that. Now, on this memory card, I've got a couple of movies. Okay, so I'll just show you a quick clip of Avatar, the extended edition. So if you do buy one of my memory cards, you will get a whole selection of movies. You'll get 20 altogether. Okay, and they are taken from Blu-rays, so the picture quality is absolutely excellent. Okay, and I've got Battle Los Angeles and Tron Legacy, but like I said, you'll receive 20 movies altogether. If I go to Game Memory Stick then, and I'll just show you a selection of the kind of PSP games I've got. So I've got Assassin's Creed, got God of War Chains of Olympus, Gran Turismo, Grand Theft Auto. I've got all the Grand Theft Auto games, but the one I've got on this memory card is Chinatown Wars. I've got Little Big Planet. Okay, and a whole range of other PSP games. And like I said, if you do buy one of my memory cards, you'll have 30 PSP games altogether. Well, you also get our PlayStation 1 games. So here's Parappa the Rapper, Crash Bandicoot 3, you've got Quake 2, Silent Hill, and you've got all the Resident Evil games. So there's Resident Evil 3, this is the Leon disc of Resident Evil 2, and there's Resident Evil 1, and you've got the original version of Metal Gear Solid. Okay, and then moving on, you've got the emulators. So here are all the emulators. I'm going to start right away from the bottom with the oldest ones and move up forward through time. So you've got an emulator for the Vectrex console, which is a really old retro console, which has got around 150 games. You've got an emulator for the old home computer, the BBC, which has got around 4,500 games for it. You've got an emulator called Column PSP, which is for the ColecoVision, which has got around 300 games. Emulator for the Spectrum ZX console called Fuse, and there's over 1,000 games altogether. So with all of these emulators, pretty much you've got every single game ever made for that computer or console. Okay, so moving on, you've got the Atari consoles. So I've got an emulator for the Atari 2600, and there's 400 games altogether for that one. The Atari 5200, which has got over 100 games, and the Atari 7800, which has got over 100 games again. Okay, next up, we've got an emulator for the Amiga, which has got about 200 games on it. Next, Vice is an emulator for the Commodore 64, which has got around 10,000 games. Next, we've got an emulator called MSX, which is for two consoles, the MSX1 and the MSX2. You probably won't have heard of this because it was only ever released in Japan, China, South America. But a lot of classic old franchises like Metal Gear Solid games, Bomberman, the 1940 games, Castlevania, the Final Fantasy and the R-Top games all began on the MSX. So you get a whole load of classic games for that. So there's about 650 games altogether for that. Next, we've got an emulator called ScumVM, which is an emulator for classic point-and-click adventure games such as Secret of Monkey Island and Day of the Tentacle. Race is an emulator for the Neo Geo Pocket and the Neo Geo Pocket Color. That's got around 300 games, and you're talking about classic games like Metal Slug, SNK vs Capcom, and Street Fighter as well. Okay, now PC Engine is what this console was called in Japan and other parts of the world, but we here know it as TurboGrafx 16 and in America as well. So there's over 1,500 games for this one, and you're talking about classic games like Aero Blasters and a whole range of arcade games as well. Okay, so moving on, we come to the home consoles now. So we start with the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System. Again, I've got every single game ever made for the NES installed on the memory card, which is around 1,000 games altogether. Next emulator I've got is called Master Boy. Now this emulator actually emulates 4 consoles, not just the one. So it emulates the Game Boy Color, the Sega Game Gear and the Sega Master System. And all those games and consoles combined, you're talking about over 2,500 games. Okay, the next one is called GPSP, and that's an emulator for the Game Boy Advance. I've got over 500 games for that one. So you're talking about classic games like Golden Sun, the WarioWare games, Pokemon games, Metroid games and Zelda games. Okay, next up we've got an emulator called Pico Drive, which emulates both the Sega Mega Drive and the Sega Mega CD. So when it comes to the Mega Drive, you're talking about Sonic games, the Streets of Rage games, Desert Strike, Jungle Strike, and the Shinobi games and all of that. But like I said, I've got every single game ever made for the Mega Drive. Same again with SNES 9X, which is an emulator for the Super Nintendo. Again, every single game ever made, which is over 1,000 altogether. And here you're talking about the Donkey Kong games, Mario All-Stars, Super Mario Kart, F-Zero, the Mega Man games, Castlevania, the Street Fighter, and the Zelda games. Okay, now we move on to one called Daedalus, which is an emulator for the Nintendo 64. Now, I haven't got every single game ever made for the N64 because some of them work and some of them don't. So what I've done is actually I've been through every single game, tested them to make sure which ones work, and the ones that work I've included on there. So you're talking about 100 altogether, and all the classics are there, such as GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, Banjo-Kazooie, ISS, Mario Kart 64, and of course Super Mario 64. And Zelda Ocarina of Time, for example. Okay, the next emulator is called PSP Legacy, and that allows you to play the full original PC versions of Doom 1 and Doom 2. Now, the next 3, CPS-1, CPS-2, and the Neo Geo one, they're all emulators for classic arcade hardware. So you're talking about classic games such as Street Fighter, the Metal Slug games, Ghouls and Ghosts, but they're not scaled down for the home consoles. They're the full original arcade versions with the full graphics and sound. So for the CPS2, for example, you've got Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. And for the Neo Geo, you're talking about games like Art of Fighting, the Double Dragon games, Fatal Fury, King of Monsters, the Metal Slug games, Buster Move, Samurai Showdown, and the King of Fighters games. Okay, and if you go back up, you've got the PS1 games. We go back up to the PSP games, so there's Tekken 6. And we go back up to the top. So, if you're interested in buying one of my memory cards, either 16 or 32 gig, please get in touch with the various ways that are listed below. You can contact me anytime, I'll get back to you as quick as I can. Depending on which one you choose, 16 or 32 gig, the price does vary. And if you want to see the games that are here and the emulators that are here, if you want to see them working, please check out my other videos, because I have made a couple of videos showing everything working, showing that everything runs exactly the same as the console original, exactly as it would have done on the original console. Okay, so if you'd like to buy one of my memory cards, please get in touch. Thank you very much for watching.